My husband left me for a rich woman, but the billionaires will name me the sole heir. When he walked out chasing wealth and glamour, I thought my story was over. But then, a billionaire's final will change everything. Suddenly, I was the heir to a fortune, and the target of his furious family, my vengeful ex, and his new lover. They forged lies, stirred scandals, and tried to take it all away. Now I must fight not just for the inheritance, but for my dignity, my future, and the truth. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The evening light filtered through the kitchen curtains, casting long shadows across the wooden table where Evelyn sat. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pushed peas around her plate. Across from her, Harold's chair stood empty, his half-eaten dinner abandoned when the phone had rung 20 minutes earlier. Now he stood by the doorway, methodically zipping his suitcase shut. The sound cut through the room like a knife. "You're really going then?" Evelyn's voice was barely audible over the gentle clink of her fork against the china, her mother's wedding gift 40 years ago. Harold didn't look up. His hands, once strong and sure when he built their back porch, now spotted with age, fumbled with a luggage tag. There's nothing left to discuss. Evelyn set down her fork. The silverware clinked against the edge of her plate, the sound impossibly loud in the kitchen they'd shared for 4 decades. The same kitchen where they'd celebrated promotions, mourned losses, and raised their children. The walls themselves seemed to hold their history. 40 years, Harold. Doesn't that mean anything? Harold finally looked up, his face a mask she no longer recognized. The warm eyes that had once looked at her with such tenderness had turned cold, distant, like he was already gone. "I've given you the best years of my life, Evelyn." He straightened his collar, a gesture so familiar it broke something inside her. "And what do I have to show for it?" "This." He waved his hand dismissively at their modest home. "I deserve more." Outside, a car horn hung twice. Harold's expression shifted, softened at the edges. That look Evelyn remembered when he used to save it for her. "Is she out there?" Evelyn rose from her chair, legs unsteady. "You invited her to our home?" "Sylvia's just giving me a ride." But the way his eyes brightened told another story. Sylvia. Evelyn tested the name, finding it bitter on her tongue. From the country club, Harold lifted the suitcase. "She understands me, Evelyn. She sees who I could be." "And who is that?" Evelyn's voice grew stronger, steadier than she felt. "Someone who walks away from 40 years of marriage? Someone who breaks vows?" Harold's jaw tightened. "Someone important. Someone with status." He glanced around their kitchen with its outdated appliances and faded wallpaper. "Not just some nobody stuck in this mediocrity." The horn sounded again, impatient. "She's wealthy, isn't she?" Evelyn whispered, the truth finally taking shape. "That's what this is about." Harold didn't deny it. "Sylvia moves in circles we could only dream of. She has connections, a lifestyle. And that matters more than our life together?" The pain in Evelyn's chest threatened to buckle her knees. Harold checked his watch, the anniversary gift she'd saved 3 years to buy him. "I'm not getting any younger, Evelyn. This is my last chance at something more." The horn blared a third time. "You should go." Evelyn sank back into her chair. "She's waiting." Harold hesitated at the door, suitcase in hand. For one breathless moment, Evelyn thought he might change his mind. Instead, he delivered the final blow. "I've found something real with Sylvia. Something I never had with you." The door slammed behind him, rattling the family photos on the wall. Through the window, Evelyn caught a glimpse of sleek red convertible, a flash of platinum blonde hair. Then they were gone, leaving only the sound of Evelyn's uneven breathing and the quiet clink of silverware as her trembling hand knocked against her plate. She stared at the cooling food, the empty chair, and the life that had just collapsed around her. Morning light crept through the blinds, painting stripes across Evelyn's bed. She hadn't slept, not really. Her eyes burned as she stared at the ceiling, the pillow beside her undisturbed for the first time in decades. The house creaked and settled in unfamiliar ways, as if it too felt the absence. Evelyn swung her legs over the edge of the bed. The floor felt colder beneath her feet than it ever had before. She put on her robe, the soft blue one Harold had complained made her look old, and moved toward the hallway with halting steps. The bathroom counter stretched empty and clean. No shaving cream rings, No wet towel crumpled on the floor. The medicine cabinet gaped with spaces where his aftershave and blood pressure medication once stood. You always did pack thoroughly, she whispered to the vacant spaces. In the kitchen, she filled the kettle and set it on the stove. Her hand automatically reached for 2 mugs before she caught herself. Just one now. She returned the extra mug to the cabinet, the soft click of ceramic against wood echoing the silence. The house felt vast around her, its familiar corners suddenly foreign territory. Evelyn drifted from room to room like a ghost in her own home. She traced her fingers across Harold's leather recliner, still molded to the shape of him. The remote control sat precisely where he left it 2 nights before, when they watched that nature documentary about penguins. He'd fallen asleep before the end. She opened the closet in their bedroom, her bedroom now, and stared at the empty hangers. His suits, his shirts, even his old sweaters with the worn elbows all gone. The scent of his cologne lingered faintly, a cruel reminder. In the garage, the space where his golf clubs had stood for 15 years yawned empty. Just a few dust outlines remained on the concrete floor. The pegboard above his workbench had gaps where favorite tools once hung. You even took the drill, she murmured, touching the empty hook. I gave you that for Christmas. Back in the living room, Evelyn paused at the mantel. Family photos stood in neat rows, holidays, anniversaries, graduations. Harold's smile looked back at her from behind glass, frozen in happier times. Had he been planning this even then, looking for an escape while posing for Christmas portraits? A photo caught her eye, their wedding day. Young Evelyn in a simple white dress, Harold beaming in his rented tuxedo. They'd had nothing then. A tiny apartment, second-hand furniture, dreams bigger than their bank account. She never minded. They'd been enough for each other. What changed? She lifted the frame, studying his youthful face. When did I stop being enough? Something broke loose inside her chest. The knot of shock that had held her together since yesterday unraveled suddenly. Evelyn's knees weakened as the first sob tore free. She stumbled to the couch, clutching the wedding photo to her heart. 40 years dissolved into salt and water as she wept. For the young bride in the photo, for the plans they'd made, for the golden anniversary they would never celebrate. We were supposed to grow old together, she whispered between ragged breath. That was the promise. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, painting the neighborhood in cheerful light. Inside, Evelyn curled around the photograph, her tears finally slowing as exhaustion claimed her. Sleep crept over her like a merciful tide, pulling her under into fitful dreams where Harold still sat across from her at breakfast, still hung his coat by the door, still belonged to her life. The harsh clatter of the mail slot jerked Evelyn from sleep. She lifted her head from the couch cushion, momentarily disoriented. The wedding photo lay on the floor where it had slipped from her grasp. Her body ached from hours curled in an awkward position, and afternoon light flooded the living room. She rubbed her swollen eyes. How long had she slept? The clock on the mantel read 2:17 p.m. Coming, she called automatically, though no one had knocked, just the mail. Evelyn pushed herself up with effort. Her joints protested as she shuffled to the entryway where several envelopes lay scattered on the floor beneath the mail slot. A water bill with its threatening red stripe. A grocery store flyer. A charity appeal with sad-eyed children on the envelope. And at the bottom of the pile, a thick cream-colored envelope bearing an embossed return address. Hargrove, Williams, Stone, attorneys at law. What's this? Evelyn murmured, turning it over in her hands. The paper felt expensive, heavy between her fingers. Her name and address were printed in precise black letters. She carried the mail back to the couch, dropping the bills and advertisements onto the coffee table. Only the law firm's envelope remained in her trembling hands. Her mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Was Harold suing for divorce already? Had he found some way to claim more of their modest savings? Just open it, she told herself, sliding her finger beneath the sealed flap. Inside was a single sheet of heavyweight stationery and a smaller sealed envelope. She unfolded the letter, squinting slightly without her reading glasses. Dear Mrs. Carter, it began. The law offices of Hargrove, Williams, Stone, request your presence at 10:00 a.m. on Thursday, May 14th regarding the reading of the last will and testament of Walter Kensington III. Your attendance is specifically requested by the deceased. Transportation can be arranged if necessary. Please contact our office to confirm your attendance. The letter was signed by someone named Jonathan Hargrove, senior partner. Evelyn read it 3 times, certain she'd misunderstood. Walter Kensington III, the reclusive billionaire whose death had been announced on the news last week? This can't be right, she whispered. She'd met the man exactly once, years ago, during her volunteer shift at the downtown food pantry. He hadn't introduced himself, she'd only recognized him later from a newspaper photograph. He was just a thin, elderly man in a modest suit who'd asked for an extra cup of coffee and thanked her when she'd slipped him a second dinner roll against the rules. They'd chatted briefly about the spring weather. That was all. Evelyn turned the smaller envelope over in her hands. Her name was written across it in shaky handwriting. She broke the seal and pulled out a note card with just 3 lines. You showed kindness when you thought no one was looking. That tells me everything I need to know about you. All will be explained. WK. She pressed the card to her chest. A strange feeling washing over her, not quite hope, not quite fear, but something that made her heart beat faster than it had in days. Why me? Evelyn whispered, carefully setting the letter on the coffee table. Of all people, why me? Morning light slanted through the kitchen blinds, casting stripes across Evelyn's worn linoleum floor. She stood before the mirror in the hallway, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her navy blue dress, the one she'd worn to her niece's graduation 3 years ago. The hem fell just below her knees, modest and proper. But even her untrained eye could see it was at least a decade out of style. It'll have to do, she murmured, pinning a simple pearl brooch to the collar Harold's gift from their 20th anniversary. She'd almost left it in the jewelry box, but sentiment won over heartache. The kitchen clock read 8:47. She had over an hour before the appointment, but the thought of being late to meet with fancy lawyers made her stomach tighten. Evelyn poured the remains of her barely touched coffee down the sink and rinsed the cup with trembling hands. She'd hardly slept. Walter Kensington's note sat on her nightstand all night, his cryptic message playing over and over in her mind. What could a billionaire possibly want with her? The very idea seemed absurd. Evelyn grabbed her handbag, the good one, with the leather still intact at the handles, and checked its contents. Wallet, reading glasses, handkerchief, the attorney's letter, and bus schedule. She declined their offer of transportation, too embarrassed at the thought of some sleek town car pulling up to her shabby little house. At the door, she hesitated, catching sight of herself in the entry mirror. A woman she barely recognized stared back, gray-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun, lines etched deeper around her eyes since Harold left, shoulders slightly stooped as if bearing an invisible weight. You can do this, she told her reflection, then added a whispered prayer. Lord, whatever this is, please help me face it with grace. The bus ride downtown took 40 minutes. Evelyn clutched her purse on her lap, watching as modest neighborhoods gave way to increasingly imposing buildings. The financial district rose before her, all glass and steel, reaching toward the clouds. How out of place she felt, like a sparrow among eagles. She disembarked 3 blocks early, needing the walk to settle her nerves. The sidewalks teemed with purpose-driven people half her age, their expressions serious, their steps quick and sure. Women in tailored suits and heels that clicked assertively on the pavement. Men with sleek briefcases and expensive watches glinting in the morning sun. Evelyn checked the address for the 5th time, then stopped, her breath catching. Hargrove, Williams, Stone occupied the middle floors of the tallest building on the block, 60 stories of gleaming blue glass that reflected the sky itself. A revolving door spun constantly with people entering and exiting. Just another building, she told herself. Though it felt like approaching a fortress. She paused at the entrance, watching a young woman confidently stride through the revolving door without breaking stride. Evelyn took a deep breath and stepped forward, pushing her way in with cautious effort. The lobby stretched before her, all polished marble and soaring ceilings. A massive crystal chandelier hung overhead, scattering light like diamonds. Security guards with earpieces stood at attention near turnstiles where people swiped badges. Behind a curved desk of gleaming black stone, 3 receptionists answered calls with practiced efficiency. Evelyn stood frozen just inside the entrance, clutching her purse against her chest. People flowed around her like water around a stone, their conversations and footsteps echoing off the hard surfaces. She felt suddenly, painfully, visible a gray-haired woman in an outdated dress, standing small amid such grandeur. I don't belong here, she thought, but Walter Kensington's note crinkled in her purse, reminding her why she'd come. Mrs. Carter? This way, please. A young woman with a tight ponytail and crisp pantsuit extended her hand toward Evelyn. Her smile seemed practiced yet kind, a professional warmth that somehow eased the tightness in Evelyn's chest. I'm Nina, Mr. Hargrove's assistant. He's waiting for you in the conference room. Evelyn followed Nina through a labyrinth of hallways, each lined with photographs of stern-faced men in expensive suits. Their footsteps fell silent against plush carpet as they passed office after office of people speaking in hushed, important tones. The conference room door stood open. Inside, a long oak table gleamed under recessed lighting, its surface so polished Evelyn could see her reflection. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking view of the city stretching to the horizon. Please, have a seat. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? Just water. Thank you, Evelyn managed, her throat suddenly dry. Nina pulled out a chair midway down the table. Evelyn lowered herself into it, painfully aware of how the leather creaked beneath her. She placed her handbag in her lap, then moved it to the floor, then back to her lap again. The door opened again. A silver-haired man entered, followed by 3 younger associates clutching tablets and legal pads. Behind them came 2 sharply dressed women. Evelyn didn't recognize their expressions unreadable. Mrs. Carter, thank you for coming. I'm James Hargrove, senior partner and executor of Mr. Kensington's estate. His handshake was firm, but not overpowering. He took the seat at the head of the table while the others arranged themselves around them. These are my colleagues, he said, introducing the associates. And these ladies are Victoria Kensington, Walter's niece, and Marjorie Kensington, his sister-in-law. The women nodded stiffly, their eyes swept over Evelyn with barely concealed curiosity, lingering on her outdated dress and simple hairstyle. Evelyn's hands found each other beneath the table, fingers interlacing so tightly her knuckles whitened. She felt like an imposter, a common sparrow that had accidentally flown into a gathering of peacocks. Let's begin, Hargrove said, opening a leather portfolio. We are gathered to execute the last will and testament of Walter Kensington III, who passed away 2 weeks ago at the age of 79. The lawyer's voice took on a formal cadence as he read through legal preliminaries. Evelyn tried to focus, but her mind kept returning to the same question. Why was she here? She'd met Walter Kensington exactly once, 7 years ago, while volunteering at the community food pantry. He'd been just another elderly gentleman in need of a meal and conversation. Nothing special had happened. She hadn't even recognized his name until she saw it in the newspaper after his death. And now to the distribution of assets, Hargrove continued, pulling out a separate document. Victoria Kensington leaned forward slightly, her manicured fingernails tapping against the tabletop. To my niece, Victoria, I leave my collection of first edition books, with the hope she will value their contents as much as their worth. Victoria's face tightened almost imperceptibly. To my sister-in-law, Marjorie, I leave my summer home in Cape Cod and an annual stipend of $50,000 for its maintenance. Marjorie's lips pressed into a thin line. Hargrove cleared his throat, glancing briefly at Evelyn before continuing. As to the remainder of my estate, including all properties, business holdings, investments, and liquid assets totaling approximately $4.3 billion. The room went utterly still. Even the city beyond the windows seemed to hold its breath. I hereby bequeath everything to Evelyn Marie Carter, a woman whose simple kindness showed me more humanity in one afternoon than I had experienced in decades among the wealthy and powerful. Gasps erupted around the table. Victoria's face drained of color. Marjorie's hand flew to her throat. The room tilted beneath Evelyn. Dark spots swam before her eyes as the lawyer's words echoed in her ears. 4 billion, she whispered. Before the world went sideways and everything faded to black. Evelyn's taxi pulled into her quiet suburban street as dusk painted the sky in watercolor pinks and purples. The driver had called her ma'am with newfound deference after the law firm paid for her ride home. Mr. Hargrove had insisted, said it wasn't proper for a billionaire to take the bus. Billionaire. The word felt foreign, like clothes that didn't fit. As the taxi approached her modest ranch-style home, Evelyn noticed small clusters of neighbors gathered on sidewalks, heads bent together in conversation. Mrs. Hoffman from next door spotted the taxi and nudged Mrs. Reeves from across the street. Their gazes locked onto Evelyn through the window. "This is fine," Evelyn told the driver, suddenly not wanting to pull directly into her driveway under their watchful eyes. "I can walk from here." The taxi rolled to a stop. Evelyn handed the driver a $5 tip, a generous amount by her usual standards, then realized with a jolt that such calculations no longer mattered. The thought made her stomach twist. She stepped onto the sidewalk, clutching her handbag. The neighbors' conversations died instantly. Their stares burned into her back as she walked the final 50 feet to her home. "Evening, Evelyn," called Mrs. Hoffman, her voice honey-sweet with curiosity. "Lovely day, isn't it?" "Just fine, thank you," Evelyn replied, fumbling with her house key. "Heard some interesting news about you today," Mrs. Reeves chimed in, edging closer. "Something about that Kensington fellow who passed?" Evelyn's key finally slid into the lock. "Excuse me, I'm rather tired." Inside, she leaned against the closed door, heart hammering. The house felt different, somehow smaller, older, less like a sanctuary and more like a museum piece that no longer belonged to her. She wandered into the kitchen and poured a glass of water with shaking hands. The events of the day played through her mind like scenes from someone else's life. Mr. Hargrove explaining the details after she'd recovered from her fainting spell. The paper she'd signed acknowledging receipt of the will's contents. The business card with his private number that now sat in her purse. The promise that they would meet tomorrow to begin the transition. Evelyn sank into a kitchen chair, overwhelmed. 7 years ago, she'd served soup to a thin, quiet man at the community center. They talked about garden vegetables and mystery novels. He thanked her for listening. That was all. Now she owned his fortune. The harsh blare of a car horn shattered her thoughts. Through the kitchen window, she saw a sleek black Mercedes screech to a halt in her driveway. Harold stepped out from the driver's side, his face a thundercloud. From the passenger door emerged Sylvia Whitmore, her caramel-highlighted hair catching the last rays of sunlight. Evelyn's chest tightened. She hadn't seen Sylvia in person before, only glimpsed her image in the country club photo Harold had left behind. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by pounding. "Evelyn, open this door immediately," Harold's voice boomed. With legs that felt like water, Evelyn moved to the entryway. She opened the door just enough to see them both, maintaining the chain lock as a barrier. Harold's face was flushed crimson. "What did you do? What kind of game are you playing?" "I don't know what you mean," Evelyn said quietly. Sylvia pushed forward, her perfume overwhelming the space between them. "Don't play innocent. We know about Kensington's will. What did you do? Seduce a dying old man?" Her perfectly painted lips curled with disgust. "You manipulative witch," Harold spat. "You couldn't stand that I found happiness, could you? Had to scheme your way into money to spite me." "I didn't scheme anything," Evelyn whispered. "I barely knew him." "Liar," Sylvia hissed. "Nobody leaves billions to strangers." Neighbors were gathering on the sidewalk now, witnessing the spectacle. "Please go," Evelyn said, her voice breaking. "This isn't the place." "This isn't over," Harold growled. "Not by a long shot." Evelyn closed the door against their continued shouts. She slid the deadbolt into place with trembling fingers, then pressed her back against the door, sliding down until she sat on the floor. Their muffled accusations continued outside, punctuated by the slam of car doors and the squeal of tires as they finally departed. In the sudden silence of her home, Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself and shook. Morning light streamed through the kitchen blinds as Evelyn made her shopping list. Sleep had been elusive, her mind racing with everything that had happened. The ordinary task of planning meals felt strangely comforting, though the thought of entering town filled her with dread. "One step at a time," she whispered to herself, the words her mother had always used during difficult moments. Evelyn drove to Pearson's Grocery, the same family-owned store where she shopped for 30 years. As she reached for a cart, she noticed heads turning in her direction. "Morning, Evelyn," called Fred Pearson from behind the deli counter. His smile seemed a touch too bright, his eyes a bit too curious. "Good morning, Fred," she replied softly. She navigated toward the produce section, focusing on selecting the perfect apples. Mrs. Miller, who taught Sunday school with Evelyn, appeared beside her. "Evelyn, I heard the news." Mrs. Miller touched her arm. "How? Unexpected." "Yes, it was quite a shock." "I imagine so." Mrs. Miller's smile tightened. "Well, blessings come in mysterious ways, don't they?" As Mrs. Miller walked away, Evelyn distinctly heard her mutter, "Some blessings more mysterious than others." Near the dairy case, Evelyn reached for a carton of eggs. Two women at the end of the aisle glanced her way, then huddled closer together. "Always those quiet ones you have to watch," one whispered loudly enough for Evelyn to hear. Walter Kensington was, 80? And living alone all those years. Evelyn's hand trembled as she set the eggs in her cart. The women fell silent as she passed, offering stiff smiles. In the bread aisle, Tom Fletcher, whose family had attended their church for generations, approached with an outstretched hand. "Evelyn, big news about your windfall. Harold must be kicking himself now." His laugh boomed through the store. "Harold and I are divorced," Evelyn corrected gently. Right. Timing's a bit convenient though, isn't it?" He winked. "Well, you enjoy yourself. I hear Kensington's estate has a swimming pool shaped like a dollar sign." Evelyn blinked back tears as Tom walked away. She'd served on charity committees with these people, prayed with them, brought them casseroles during hard times. As she rounded the corner toward the frozen foods, she spotted Margaret Wilson on her cell phone. Margaret, her closest friend from church, was partially hidden behind a display of cereal boxes. But her voice carried. "Of course, I've known Evelyn for years, but this doesn't add up." Harold told Judith that Walter visited their house several times when Evelyn was alone. Margaret lowered her voice. "I hate to say it, but she must have done something to make him change his will. You don't just give billions to someone who served you soup once." Evelyn's cart stopped mid-aisle. Her chest tightened as Margaret continued. "Pastor Jim's concerned too. Says we should all be supportive to her face, but keep our eyes open. Something's not right about the whole thing." The basket of fresh peaches Evelyn had been holding slipped from her fingers, scattering across the floor. Margaret spun around, her face paling when she saw Evelyn. "I have to go," she said quickly into the phone. "Evelyn, I was just..." But Evelyn had already turned away, abandoning her half-filled cart. She walked through the store with her head down, aware of every eye following her, every whisper trailing in her wake. Outside in the parking lot, the summer sun felt cold against her skin. She slid into her car, hands gripping the steering wheel. "One step at a time," she repeated. But the words ran hollow as tears blurred her vision. The table lamp cast long shadows across Mr. Anderson's office. Outside the windows, darkness had swallowed the city, and Evelyn's reflection looked ghostly against the glass. She clutched her purse in her lap, the leather worn from years of use. "I appreciate you meeting me so late, Mr. Anderson." The lawyer nodded, his silver-rimmed glasses catching the light. "Given the circumstances, I thought it best not to delay." He opened a folder with careful fingers. "I have received formal notice that the Kensington family will be contesting the will." Evelyn's stomach tightened. On what grounds? Undue influence. Lack of testamentary capacity. He looked up, his expression grave. "They're claiming Walter wasn't of sound mind when he made you his heir, and that you somehow manipulated him." "But that's ridiculous. I barely knew him." Evelyn's voice cracked. "We only spoke a handful of times at the food pantry. The Kensingtons don't care about the truth. They care about the money." Mr. Anderson removed his glasses. "They've hired Blackwell and Associates. They're known for aggressive tactics, including private investigators." "Private investigators? To investigate what?" "You, Mrs. Carter. Your past, your finances, your relationships." He hesitated. "They'll dig through everything. Talk to your neighbors, your friends, even your ex-husband." Evelyn's mind flashed to Harold and Sylvia, to the whispers in the grocery store, to Margaret on the phone. They've already started building their narrative, Mr. Anderson continued. They'll suggest a romantic relationship between you and Walter. They'll question your character. But there's nothing to find, Evelyn protested. It's not about finding something real. It's about creating doubt. He leaned forward. Mrs. Carter, these people are wealthy and powerful. They'll stop at nothing to discredit you. What should I do? Be careful who you trust. Document everything. And prepare yourself, this will get ugly before it gets better. The drive home felt endless. Evelyn's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating empty streets. The lawyer's words echoed in her mind. Private investigators. Character assassination. Her whole life laid bare and twisted into something unrecognizable. She pulled into her driveway and sat in silence. The house that had once been her sanctuary now felt exposed, vulnerable. Inside, she didn't bother turning on the lights. The moonlight filtering through the curtains was enough to guide her to the living room. She sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. On the coffee table lay the newspaper she'd found in the library archives earlier that week. Walter Kensington's stern face stared back from a faded photograph. The article detailed his rise in business, his philanthropy, his notorious reclusiveness. Nothing about the man explained why he'd chosen her. Evelyn traced his face with her fingertip. He looked solemn, almost sad, despite his success. Why did you choose me? She whispered. You've handed me a blessing that feels like a curse. The house creaked and settled around her. From the mantel, the clock ticked away the seconds. The sound of a car passing made her tense, wondering if it was slowing down, if someone was watching. How quickly everything had changed. Last week, she'd been nothing but a betrayed wife, left to fade into obscurity. Now she was at the center of a storm, a target. The darkness of the room seemed to deepen. Evelyn hugged herself, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She never felt more alone, more exposed, more afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Morning sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, painting golden stripes across Evelyn's kitchen table. She hadn't slept well, her dreams filled with faceless people pointing and whispering. But the warm light brought with it a seed of resolve. Evelyn poured herself a cup of tea and opened her checkbook, the blue cover worn at the edges. Mr. Anderson had assured her that until the court decided otherwise, a portion of Walter's fortune was legally hers to access. The amount in her account now contained more zeros than she'd ever imagined managing. She tapped her pen against the table. If the Kensingtons wanted to paint her as greedy and manipulative, perhaps the best response wasn't words but actions. Walter's obituary mentioned his support of veterans' causes. It was one detail that had stuck with Evelyn. Her own father had served in Korea. She filled out the check carefully, her handwriting steady despite the weight of the sum. She wrote $25,000 to Lakeside Veterans Home. It was more money than she and Harold had donated in their entire married life. This is for you, Walter, she whispered. And for Dad. Evelyn dressed simply in a blue blouse and modest slacks. No need to call attention to herself with anything fancy. The bank manager's eyes widened when she presented the check, but he processed it without comment. 15 minutes later, she walked out with a certified check, the weight of it in her purse both terrifying and exhilarating. The veterans' home sat on the outskirts of town, a red brick building surrounded by maple trees. Its sign needed repainting, and the wheelchair ramp looked worn. Evelyn parked her 10-year-old sedan beside a maintenance truck and gathered her courage. Inside, the front desk was staffed by a young woman with kind eyes. I'd like to make a donation, Evelyn said quietly. That's wonderful. We can certainly use any help. The woman reached for a form. Will this be cash or check? Evelyn placed the certified check on the counter. The woman stared at it, blinking rapidly. There must be some mistake. This says $25,000. No mistake. Ma'am, we usually need to speak with the director for donations of this size. Could I have your name? Evelyn Carter. She hesitated. It's in memory of Walter Kensington. Recognition flickered across the woman's face. The news about Walter's will had spread throughout town. Please wait here. Minutes later, a balding man in a cardigan hurried toward her, hand extended. Mrs. Carter, I'm James Willis, the director. We're absolutely stunned by your generosity. He insisted on giving her a tour, showing her the recreation room where the piano was missing keys, the library with its outdated books, The dining hall where veterans gathered for meals and companionship. In the garden, several elderly men played checkers. One man in a wheelchair looked up as they approached, his weathered face creasing into a smile. Martin served in Vietnam, James explained. He's been with us for 15 years. Martin wheeled himself forward. The director says you're an angel with a checkbook. Evelyn felt her cheeks warm. Hardly that, just someone trying to do some good. Martin reached for her hands with fingers gnarled by arthritis. His grip was surprisingly strong, his eyes clear and bright with unshed tears. This place saved my life when I had nowhere else to go, he said. God bless you for remembering old soldiers like us. The simple sincerity in his voice touched something deep in Evelyn's heart. For the first time since Harold left, since Walter's will had upended her world, she felt a flicker of genuine purpose. She squeezed Martin's hands gently before letting go. As she walked back to her car, the weight on her shoulders felt lighter. The whispers and accusations couldn't touch this moment of connection, this small victory of kindness over bitterness. The Kensington estate sprawled across 5 acres of manicured grounds. The main house, a stately colonial that had stood for generations. Evelyn followed Mr. Anderson, the family attorney, through the grand foyer, feeling like an intruder, despite the keys that now jangled in her pocket. Walter spent most of his time in here, Mr. Anderson said, opening a heavy oak door. His study was his sanctuary. Evelyn stepped inside and caught her breath. Afternoon light filtered through tall windows, illuminating floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive desk of polished mahogany. The room smelled of leather, paper, and something else, perhaps wisdom. Take your time, Mr. Anderson said. Everything here belongs to you now. After he left, Evelyn moved slowly around the room, trailing her fingers over book spines and picture frames. Unlike the cold opulence of the rest of the house, this space felt lived in, personal. A well-worn leather chair sat angled toward the fireplace, a reading lamp beside it. She paused at the desk, noticing a stack of leather-bound volumes in the center drawer. Journals, each dated on the spine in neat gold lettering. The most recent one was only half filled, ending abruptly 3 months ago when Walter died. Evelyn lifted the earliest journal from 15 years before. The handwriting inside was elegant but strong, like the man himself had been. March 4th. The board voted unanimously for my expansion plan today. They smiled and shook my hand, then whispered behind my back at lunch. Money brings power but never respect. What would father think of what his company has become? What would he think of me? She turned more pages, glimpsing the private thoughts of a man she'd barely known. Walter wrote of business dealings and family disappointments, of sunsets viewed alone from his terrace. The third journal caught her eye, an entry from around the time they'd met. November 12th, volunteered at the downtown pantry again. The older woman who organizes the canned goods noticed my gloves were worn and offered me her spare pair. Imagine that, offering winter gloves to someone she assumes is another volunteer, not knowing I could buy the building. When I declined, she simply squeezed my hand and said, "Stay warm then, friend." Her name tag read Evelyn. I wonder if she knows how rare genuine kindness is in this world. Evelyn's hand trembled. She remembered that day, a cold November morning. She noticed an older gentleman stacking cans, his expensive watch peeking from beneath frayed gloves. She hadn't known he was Walter Kensington. She carried the journals to the leather chair and curled into it, reading entries spanning years. Walter wrote of his growing disillusionment with his greedy relatives, his search for meaning beyond wealth, and his quiet observations of people who never suspected his identity. In his final journal, an entry stood out in bolder script than the others. We leave trails behind us, invisible but permanent, not of wealth or achievements, but of how we treated others when nothing was expected in return. My family leaves trails of broken promises and grabbed opportunities, but I've seen others like that woman Evelyn at the pantry, who leave trails of kindness that bloom long after they've passed. I want my final trail to matter. Tears spilled down Evelyn's cheeks, dropping onto the page. Walter's words reached across time and death, speaking directly to her wounded heart. She hadn't known him, yet he had seen her, truly seen her, when she felt invisible to everyone else. I'll try to be worthy. She whispered to the empty room that somehow didn't feel empty anymore. I promise your trail will matter. Walter's journals stayed with Evelyn long after she returned them to the desk. His words echoed in her mind as she drove past Millfield Elementary the next morning. The school's playground equipment, rusted and worn from 20 years of children's laughter, caught her eye. She slowed, noticing the faded murals and cracked basketball court. By afternoon, she sat across from Principal Hernandez, checkbook open on the desk between them. Mrs. Carter, this is. Principal Hernandez stared at the amount, blinking rapidly. Are you certain? Completely certain. Evelyn signed her name with steady hands. The children deserve better than broken swings and cracked pavement. The principal's eyes glistened. We've applied for district funding for 5 years straight. Well, now you won't have to wait any longer. 3 days later, Evelyn received a call from Dr. Whitman at the community clinic. She'd mentioned her intention to help with the medical assistance fund, but his voice carried an urgent tone. Mrs. Carter, the Rodriguez family, their little boy, needs surgery next week, but their insurance denied the claim. They're choosing between their mortgage and Miguel's operation. Evelyn remembered the family from church, hard-working people with 3 children who never complained despite their struggles. How much do they need? The sum would have terrified her a month ago. Now, she wrote a check without hesitation and delivered it personally, slipping it into Mrs. Rodriguez's hand while the woman served dinner to her children. Consider it handled, Evelyn whispered. Mrs. Rodriguez read the amount and gasped. We can't possibly. You can. And someday, when you're able, you'll help someone else. Word spread through town like a gentle wave. The same grocery store where whispers had followed her now fell silent when she entered. Nodding acknowledgments replaced suspicious glances. On Thursday, Evelyn walked through Oakley Park, once the neighborhood's heart, now overgrown and abandoned. Children used to play here before the equipment was deemed unsafe and removed. Now teenagers gather to drink and smoke where families once picnicked. She called the city manager that afternoon. Within days, crews cleared debris and began installation of new playground equipment. Fresh sod replaced patchy grass. Picnic tables and flowering trees transformed the forgotten space. Some neighbors watched with open curiosity as Evelyn inspected the progress each morning, clutching her coffee mug against the autumn chill. Is it true what they are saying? Mrs. Finley asked one morning, approaching cautiously. That you're behind all this? Evelyn hesitated. The park needed restoration. Mrs. Finley studied her. My Thomas has been asking for a place to play for years. She paused. I'm sorry about what people said before. About you and Mr. Kensington. Thank you. The simple acknowledgement healed something small inside her. Saturday morning arrived with perfect blue skies for the park's ribbon cutting. Evelyn stood back as the mayor made a speech, uncomfortable with public recognition. She watched families explore the new playground, pride warming her chest. A small hand tucked her sleeve. Lucy Rodriguez, Miguel's little sister, looked up with solemn eyes. Mama says, you helped make my brother better. Before Evelyn could respond, the child threw arms around her waist, squeezing tightly. Thank you, Miss Evelyn, Lucy whispered against her sweater. Evelyn's throat tightened as she gently patted the child's back, feeling the genuine gratitude in that simple embrace. Walking home alone afterward, Evelyn's steps felt lighter than they had in weeks. The afternoon sun warmed her face, and she allowed herself a small, content smile. Walter's words from his journal returned to her, trails of kindness that bloom long after they've passed. For the first time since Harold left, she walked without the weight of abandonment pressing down on her shoulders. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, different from the bills and advertisements that typically filled Evelyn's mailbox. Heavy cream-colored paper with gold embossing caught the sunlight as she carried it inside. She set her grocery bags on the kitchen counter before carefully breaking the wax seal. Mrs. Evelyn Carter, she read aloud, fingers tracing the elegant calligraphy. The Kensington Foundation cordially invites you to attend our annual Legacy Gala honoring the philanthropic vision of Walter Kensington III. Evelyn sank into her kitchen chair, the invitation trembling slightly in her hands. The event was scheduled for the Grand Meridian Hotel downtown, the most elegant venue in the city. A handwritten note at the bottom read, Your presence would honor Walter's memory and the continuation of his charitable work. She set the invitation on the table, and stared at it. The thought of entering a ballroom filled with the city's elite made her stomach tighten. These were people who shopped at exclusive boutiques and vacationed in Europe, not people who clipped coupons and bought clothes on clearance as she had done her entire life. I can't possibly, she murmured, pushing the invitation away. Later that afternoon, while sorting through Walter's journals, she found an entry that made her pause. People hide behind wealth like its armor. They surround themselves with others wearing the same disguise. What most fail to realize is that underneath all that glitter, we're all just searching for the same thing: connection. Real, honest connection. Evelyn read the passage twice more, hearing Walter's voice in the words. Perhaps attending this gala wasn't about fitting in with the wealthy. Perhaps it was about honoring the man who had seen value in her when she felt worthless. She picked up the phone and dialed her lawyer's number. Mr. Patterson, it's Evelyn Carter. I've received an invitation to the Kensington Gala. Ah, yes, he replied. As Walter's heir and the foundation's new chairperson, they're expecting you to attend. Chairperson? Evelyn's voice faltered. I didn't realize. It's outlined in the will. The foundation continues Walter's charitable work, and he named you to lead it. He paused. Will you be attending? After a long moment, Evelyn straightened her shoulders. Yes, I will. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety. Evelyn visited the local department store, overwhelmed by formal dresses with price tags that made her wince despite her new financial status. Finally, she selected a simple midnight blue gown with three-quarter sleeves, elegant but not flashy. The night before the gala, Evelyn sat at her vanity, studying her reflection. Gray strands wove through her brown hair, and fine lines marked the passing years around her eyes. She was no society woman, no matter what Walter's money had done for her bank account. What am I doing? She whispered to her reflection. Her gaze drifted to the small jewelry box that had belonged to her mother. Opening it carefully, she removed a strand of pearls, not expensive or perfect, but luminous with memories. Her mother had worn them to church every Sunday, saving for years to afford the modest necklace. For special occasions, her mother had always said, when you need to remember who you are. Evelyn lifted the pearls to her throat, clasping them against her skin. They weren't designer jewels, but they carried something more valuable: her history, her true self. In the mirror, a hesitant smile formed on her lips. She would attend this gala not as someone pretending to belong in Walter's world, but as Evelyn Carter, the woman he had chosen precisely because she was different from that world. The Grand Meridian Hotel's ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, each prism casting fractured rainbows across marble floors. Women in designer gowns floated between clusters of men in tailored tuxedos, champagne flutes glinting in manicured hands. Laughter mingled with the gentle notes of a string quartet tucked discreetly in the corner. Evelyn paused at the entrance, her mother's pearls cool against her throat. Her midnight blue dress caught the light without demanding attention. She clutched her small handbag tighter, drawing a steadying breath. Mrs. Carter? A young attendant appeared at her side. We've been expecting you. Please, follow me. Whispers rippled through the crowd as she passed. Evelyn caught fragments, Walter's mystery air, and nobody from nowhere but kept her chin level. Walter's journal entries echoing in her mind. Dignity isn't granted by others, it's carried within. The attendant led her toward a reserved table near the front. Several faces turned, expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disdain. A woman in a glittering red gown leaned toward her companion, whispering behind a bejeweled hand. Mrs. Evelyn Carter, everyone, announced the foundation director, extending his hand to help her to her seat. Our guest of honor. Evelyn smiled politely, her eyes sweeping across unfamiliar faces until they landed on Harold and Sylvia several tables away. Her ex-husband's face darkened while Sylvia's painted lips pressed into a thin line. Evelyn quickly looked away, refusing to let their presence diminish this moment. The director tapped his glass, drawing the room's attention. Before dinner, I'd like to invite Mrs. Carter to say a few words about our beloved Walter and the foundation's future. Panic fluttered in Evelyn's chest as she approached the podium. The microphone loomed before her, capturing the sound of her uneven breath. The ballroom fell silent, 100 expectant gazes fixed upon her. I never expected to stand before you tonight, she began, her voice soft but clear. Like many of you, I'm still coming to terms with Walter's absence. Her fingers found the edge of the podium, steadying herself. Walter and I met only a handful of times at the downtown food pantry where I volunteered. He never mentioned his wealth or status. He simply rolled up his sleeves and worked alongside us, listening to people's stories with genuine interest. The room remained silent, but something in the air had shifted. Walter understood that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in moments of human connection. He taught me that kindness leaves trails for others to follow. Evelyn's voice grew stronger as she continued, sharing Walter's vision for the foundation. Every person deserves dignity. Every struggle deserves compassion. This is the legacy I hope to honor with the trust Walter placed in me. When she finished, the applause began quietly, then swelled. Several people dabbed at their eyes. Even Harold shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unable to maintain his scowl. Later, as guests mingled after dinner, Evelyn stood near a towering arrangement of white lilies, taking a moment's respite from conversations with board members and benefactors. The night had unfolded better than she dared hope, yet exhaustion tugged at her edges. She glanced across the room and froze. A tall man with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes stood watching her. The veteran's home, she recognized him immediately. David Reynolds, who thanked her with such genuine emotion when she'd made her donation. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and something warm bloomed in her chest. He made his way toward her, navigating between glittering guests with a soldier's measured grace. When he reached her, his smile was gentle, without pretense. "Mrs. Carter," he said, extending his hand. "I was hoping I might find you here tonight." Candlelight danced across white tablecloths at Riverside Cafe, the small Italian restaurant overlooking the park. The dinner crowd had thinned, leaving a peaceful hush punctuated by soft piano music. Evelyn smiled across the table at David, surprised by how comfortable silence felt between them. "I never expected to be here," she admitted, twirling pasta around her fork. "After Harold left, I thought that chapter of my life was closed forever." David nodded, understanding in his eyes. "When I lost Margaret, my wife, to cancer 5 years ago, I felt like someone had turned out all the lights." He paused, his fingers tracing the rim of his water glass. "The veteran's home became my salvation. Helping others somehow helped me." "That's exactly how I felt at the food pantry," Evelyn said, eyes brightening. "There's something healing about focusing on someone else's needs instead of your own pain." David leaned forward slightly. "You mentioned Walter Kensington yesterday. I had no idea you knew him." "I barely did, honestly." Evelyn set down her fork. "That's what makes his decision so extraordinary. He remembered me from the pantry, said I showed him kindness when I thought no one was watching." "That sounds like something you would do." David's voice was warm with certainty. Evelyn felt her cheeks flush. "How would you know that? We've only just met." "I've seen how you talk to the veterans, not like they're charity cases, but like they're people with stories worth hearing." His gaze held hers. "That kind of genuine compassion can't be faked." The waiter refilled their glasses, and David asked Evelyn about her childhood. She told him about growing up in a small town, her father's hardware store, her mother's garden. He shared the stories of military service, travels across the world, and quiet moments watching his children grow. Their lives unfolded between bites of tiramisu, different paths somehow converging at this single table. "I used to pray for Harold to change," Evelyn confessed, as they lingered over coffee. "Now I realize God wasn't ignoring my prayers. He was preparing something different." David's hand moved across the table, stopping just short of hers. "I believe that too. Faith isn't about getting what we want. It's about trusting there's purpose in what happens. Even in heartbreak?" she asked softly. "Especially then." His fingers finally bridged the gap, resting lightly on hers. "Margaret used to say that broken hearts have more room for light to enter." Evelyn's eyes glistened. "I'd like to have known her. She would have adored you," David said with certainty. Later, beneath the porch light of Evelyn's modest home, crickets sang in the garden she tended through 40 years of marriage. David stood a respectful distance away, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you for tonight," Evelyn said, keys clutched in her hand. "I haven't talked that much in, well, longer than I can remember." "The pleasure was mine." David stepped forward, taking her free hand gently. "I'd like to see you again, Evelyn. Perhaps Saturday?" There's a farmer's market downtown. I like that very much, she whispered. David bent slightly, bringing her hand to his lips. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, that Evelyn felt warmth spread from her fingertips through her entire body. His lips brushed her skin with gentle reverence. When he straightened, Evelyn's cheeks had bloomed with color, making her feel decades younger. Her heart fluttered like a girl's first dance, reminding her that some parts of us never age. Until Saturday. Then, David said, his eyes crinkling at the corners with his smile. Until Saturday, Evelyn echoed, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched. The law office of Pearson. Associates smelled of lemon polish and old books. Evelyn sat across from Timothy Pearson, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. The lawyer's expression was somber as he laid several documents on the desk between them. I wish I had better news, Evelyn. Timothy removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. Walter's relatives have escalated matters. They've filed formal charges against you. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Charges? What kind of charges? They're claiming you manipulated Walter in his final days. They've submitted sworn statements suggesting you exercised what they call undue influence over a man in declining health. But that's ridiculous. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice rising slightly. I barely knew Walter. I served him at the food pantry a few times. We chatted. That was all. Timothy nodded, sympathy creasing his face. I believe you. But the Kensington family has assembled quite a team. They've got 3 witness statements claiming you visited Walter's estate regularly in his final months. That's impossible. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I never even knew where he lived. They have photos, Evelyn, of someone entering his estate. The quality isn't great, but they're claiming it's you. Someone who looks like me, perhaps. Evelyn felt a chill spread through her body. Timothy, this is fabricated evidence. Almost certainly. He tapped the documents. But they've hired Blackwell Reed, the most aggressive firm in the state. They specialize in contesting wills. Evelyn's eyes wandered to the window. Outside, spring bloomed in defiance of her darkening world. Just yesterday, she and David had walked through the park, planning a veteran scholarship fund. What does this mean for me? Timothy's hesitation spoke volumes. They're requesting the court freeze all assets until the case is resolved. All the foundation work, the donations, the renovations, everything would halt. For how long? Cases like this can drag on for months, sometimes years. Evelyn closed her eyes. She saw the faces of the children at the youth center she'd been helping, the elderly veterans whose medical bills she'd quietly paid. Can they really do this? Stop all the good work with just accusations? Money creates its own gravity, Evelyn. The Kensingtons have deep connections. They've already secured a preliminary hearing with Judge Harmon. Harmon? Harold mentioned him. They played golf together at that country club. Timothy nodded grimly. That's concerning. The rest of the meeting blurred into legal terminology and strategy. Timothy promised to fight vigorously, but his confidence seemed forced. When Evelyn finally stepped outside, the sunshine felt wrong against her skin. She drove home slowly, her mind reeling. The neighbors waved as she passed, but their smiles seemed suspicious now. Who might be watching her? Who could she trust? Her phone rang as she entered her house, David calling to confirm their dinner plans. She let it go to voicemail, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. The mail waited on the entry table where her housekeeper had placed it. A thick envelope from the county courthouse sat on top. With trembling fingers, Evelyn tore it open. The legal language was dense, but the message was devastatingly clear. By order of the court, all assets derived from the estate of Walter Kensington III are hereby frozen pending investigation. The paper slipped from her fingers, scattering across the kitchen floor. Evelyn gripped the edge of the counter, her chest tightening as she struggled to breathe. The room spun around her as Walter's last journal entry flashed through her mind. When darkness seems to win, remember that light gathers strength in waiting. But in this moment, as her knees weakened and her vision blurred, the darkness felt absolute. The courtroom's polished oak benches gleamed under fluorescent lights as Evelyn sat rigid beside Timothy. The preliminary hearing had drawn a crowd, Walter's relatives occupying the front row, their expensive suits and cold stares, a united front of hostility. Harold and Sylvia sat directly behind them, whispering and occasionally glancing at Evelyn with smug satisfaction. Judge Harmon entered, and the room rose. Evelyn noticed the familiar golf tan on his hands, the same shade as Harold's. Her stomach tightened. "We're here to examine evidence regarding the estate of Walter Kensington III," Harmon announced, peering over his glasses at Evelyn. His expression gave nothing away, but something in his eyes made her shoulders tense. The Kensington attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Victoria Blackwell, approached the bench with practiced confidence. "Your Honor, we present Exhibit A, correspondence between Miss Carter and the deceased." The bailiff distributed copies. Evelyn stared at the letters in disbelief, elegant stationery bearing Walter's letterhead, filled with intimate exchanges she'd never written nor received. Her supposed handwriting looked convincingly similar to her own. In these letters, Blackwell continued, "Miss Carter repeatedly pressures Mr. Kensington about his will, suggesting he has moral obligations to recognize those who truly cared for him." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. "These are forgeries," she whispered to Timothy, who nodded grimly. Blackwell wasn't finished. "We also present Exhibit B, records of 17 visits Miss Carter made to Mr. Kensington's estate in his final months." Secure logs appeared on the courtroom, screens, dates, times, and a signature that looked remarkably like Evelyn's. She'd never seen these documents before, never visited that address, never signed anything. And finally, Exhibit C, a revised will draft with Miss Carter's handwritten notes in the margins. The document showed suggestions for removing family members, with what appeared to be Evelyn's handwriting calculating inheritance percentages. Timothy stood immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. My client categorically denies authoring these documents. We request forensic examination of all materials." Harmon frowned. "Request noted. The court will arrange independent analysis. Meanwhile, given the serious nature of these allegations, all assets will remain frozen." Blackwell smiled thinly. "We also request travel restrictions for Miss Carter, given the substantial sums involved." "You want to turn me into a prisoner?" Evelyn blurted, then covered her mouth, appalled at her outburst. Harmon's gavel cracked. "Miss Carter will surrender her passport to the court. Next hearing scheduled for 3 weeks from today." Outside, rain had begun to fall, matching the gray weight in Evelyn's chest. Timothy promised to start investigation immediately, but his concerned expression betrayed his worry. As he left, David approached, his face troubled. He sat in the back row throughout the proceedings. "Evelyn, His voice trailed off. "You don't believe them, do you?" Her voice sounded smaller than she intended. David shifted uncomfortably. "Those letters looked so real, and all those visits. David, I never wrote those letters. I never visited Walter's home. Someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to frame me." She reached for his hand, but he hesitated. "I want to believe you. I do. But this evidence." Evelyn felt something crack inside her chest. "Evidence can be fabricated. Truth cannot." David's gaze dropped to the wet pavement. "I just don't know what to think anymore." The rain fell harder, streaming down Evelyn's face, mingling with tears she refused to acknowledge. Without another word, she turned and walked toward her car alone, each step heavy with betrayal. Behind her, David called her name once, then fell silent. Above, the sky darkened further, clouds gathering like the doubts now surrounding her life. Rain tapped against the windows like impatient fingers as Evelyn sat motionless in her darkened living room. The only illumination came from a small lamp in the corner, casting long shadows across the walls. Around her, bills spread like fallen leaves, electric, water, property tax, insurance. Red final notice stamps glared up at her. With her accounts frozen, Evelyn was effectively destitute. The inheritance that had briefly changed her life now hung suspended, along with her reputation and dignity. She reached for her cold tea, hands trembling slightly. "Lord," she whispered into the quiet room, "I don't understand why this is happening, but I need strength. I need clarity." Her voice broke on the last word. The silence that answered seemed heavier than before. On the mantel, the clock ticked relentlessly forward, marking time in a life suddenly thrown into chaos. The phone rang, startling her. Evelyn let it go to voicemail, expecting another reporter seeking comment on the gold-digging grandmother, as one tabloid had cruelly dubbed her. Instead, Timothy's voice filled the room. Evelyn, it's Timothy. I've found something about the signatures. Call me back when you can. Hope flickered briefly before doubt extinguished it. Even concrete evidence might not be enough against the Kensington fortune and influence. The house felt emptier than it had even after Harold left. At least, then, she'd had her reputation and the comfort of being wronged rather than wrongdoer. Evelyn pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The heat had been turned down to save money. A knock at the door made her freeze. After a moment's hesitation, she approached cautiously and peered through the peephole. Margaret from church stood on the porch, clutching a covered dish. Evelyn reluctantly opened the door. I brought lasagna, Margaret said, her expression unreadable. Thought you might need it. Thank you, Evelyn replied stiffly, remembering how Margaret had been among the first to spread gossip about her. Margaret hesitated. Evelyn, I'm sorry for doubting you. When I saw those things in court yesterday, you still doubt me, Evelyn said quietly. No, that's just it. When I saw those things, I realized they couldn't be real. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I've known you 30 years. You've never calculated or schemed a day in your life. Someone's setting you up. Evelyn's defenses crumbled as Margaret embraced her. They stood in the doorway, two older women holding each other against the cruelties of a world that often discarded them as irrelevant. After Margaret left, Evelyn felt something she hadn't in days, a flicker of resolve. She moved to Walter's journals, stacked neatly on her coffee table. His words had become her compass in this storm. She opened the leather-bound book, pages falling open to a passage she'd read before. Walter's elegant handwriting filled the page. Met a remarkable woman at the food pantry today. Evelyn, her name was. While others bustled importantly around me, she simply sat with an elderly man everyone else ignored. No cameras, no recognition, just genuine kindness. I wonder if she knows how rare that is. Evelyn turned the page, and her breath caught. There, as if written for this exact moment of despair, were words she needed. Kindness leaves a trail. Evelyn, it will always come back to you. Her fingers traced the words. Walter had written her name directly in his private thoughts, long before any will or inheritance. Tears splashed onto the page, but for the first time in days, they weren't entirely from sorrow. The pale light of dawn filtered through Evelyn's curtains as she stirred from a fitful sleep on the couch. Walter's journal still open on her chest. The soft knock at the door barely registered at first these days. Every unexpected sound brought dread. The knocking persisted, gentle but determined. Evelyn smoothed her rumpled clothes and pushed her silver hair behind her ears before approaching the door. Through the peephole, she saw not one person, but many. Her heart quickened. When she cracked the door open, Evelyn found herself facing Mike Thompson, the veteran whose medical bills she'd quietly paid last month. Morning, Mrs. Carter, Mike said, his weathered face creased with a smile. Hope we didn't wake you too early. Mike? What's happening? Evelyn peered past him and gasped. Her front yard overflowed with people. Sarah Jenkins from the elementary school stood with a cluster of teachers. The Rodriguez family, whose mortgage payment she'd covered when Mr. Rodriguez lost his job, waved from the sidewalk. Mrs. Abernathy from the senior center leaned on her cane beside a group of elderly veterans. Children from the youth center darted between adults, clutching hand-drawn cards. We heard what those fancy lawyers are saying about you, Mike said, his voice gruff with emotion. It's all lies, and we know it. Ellie Rodriguez stepped forward, her young daughter clinging to her hand. You saved our home, Mrs. Carter, without asking for anything in return. We're here to tell the truth about who you really are. We all are, Sarah added, stepping onto the porch. We're going to testify for you. Every single one of us. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. But how did you? Word spreads fast in this town, Mike shrugged. Especially when someone's been wronged. Little Jessie Parker, a 7-year-old from the youth center, squeezed through the adults and thrust a colorful card toward Evelyn. You're not a bad lady, she declared with absolute certainty. You are the nice lady who bought us books and fixed our playground. Evelyn knelt down, taking the card with trembling hands. Thank you, sweetheart. Pastor Frank's voice rose from the back of the crowd. Evelyn, we've gathered evidence too. Margaret found documents showing Harold was meeting with Walter's nephew months before the will was read. They were plotting something. And I've got surveillance footage from my shop called Mr. Plangent, Chen, the hardware store owner. Shows Harold's new lady friend talking to someone who looks exactly like the man who forged those documents. My cousin works at the bank, added Diane from the library. She says there's something fishy about money transfers between Sylvia and Walter's family. Evelyn stood transfixed on her doorstep, watching as more neighbors arrived, some bringing food, others carrying folders of evidence, all offering pieces of truth to counter the carefully constructed lies. Mrs. Wilson, 83, and using a walker, made her slow way to the front. I remember when you sat with my Herbert in hospice, day after day, reading to him when I was too tired to continue. That was 15 years ago, long before any inheritance. That's who you are, Evelyn Carter. Tears blurred Evelyn's vision as she looked out over the crowd. These weren't wealthy or powerful people, just ordinary folks whose lives she'd touched without calculation or expectation. The kindness she'd scattered like seeds throughout her life had grown into this forest of support surrounding her now. A warm sensation spread through her chest, not the burning ache of betrayal or loss that had become so familiar, but something lighter, brighter. Hope, flickering back to life like a candle sheltered from the wind. The county courthouse buzzed with tension as Evelyn sat at the defendant's table, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long rectangles across the polished floor. The gallery behind her overflowed with townsfolk, some standing along the walls, others crowded in doorways. Judge Martha Wilkins, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, peered over reading glasses as Mike Thompson took the stand. Mrs. Carter paid my medical bills when the VA was dragging their feet, Mike testified, his voice steady despite his obvious discomfort in the formal setting. She asked for nothing in return, didn't even want me to know it was her. And how did you discover it was Mrs. Carter? Asked Evelyn's attorney, Miss Chen. The hospital administrator let it slip, said a kind-hearted woman had covered everything. When I pushed, she admitted it was Evelyn. Mike looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I've known that woman 30 years. She was helping folks long before she had money. Across the aisle, Sylvia Whitmore sat beside Harold, her burgundy suit immaculate, her smile thin and calculated. She leaned to whisper something to Walter's nephew, James Kensington. Mrs. Rodriguez approached the stand next, describing how Evelyn had quietly covered 3 months of their mortgage when her husband lost his job. She brought groceries too, Mrs. Rodriguez added, emotion making her voice waver, and never told a soul. As witness after witness took the stand, a pattern emerged, decades of quiet generosity, long before Walter Kensington had entered Evelyn's life. The elementary school principal described anonymous donations for children's lunches. The librarian recounted Evelyn's volunteer work with literacy programs. Even the town's gruffest mechanic testified about Evelyn paying for car repairs for struggling families. Judge Wilkins removed her glasses, studying Evelyn with newfound interest. Mrs. Carter, she said during a brief recess, you seem to have quite a community behind you. Evelyn nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm as surprised as anyone, Your Honor. When proceedings resumed, Walter's former housekeeper took the stand, her testimony landing like a bombshell. Mr. Kensington spoke of Mrs. Carter often in his final months. She stated firmly. He said meeting her at that food pantry years ago reminded him what real kindness looked like. He was of sound mind when he changed his will. Sylvia's face tightened. She passed a note to her lawyer, who immediately requested another recess. The judge denied it. As the afternoon wore on, David slipped into the courtroom, catching Evelyn's eye with an apologetic smile. He mouthed, I'm sorry from the back row. Evelyn felt a weight lift from her heart. Just as Evelyn's lawyer prepared to call her final witness, the courtroom doors burst open. A wiry man in a rumpled suit strolled down the center aisle, clutching a leather portfolio. Your Honor, he called out. I'm Sam Donovan, private investigator. I have evidence that needs immediate consideration. Judge Wilkins frowned at the interruption. Approach the bench, Mr. Donovan. The investigator handed over several documents and a small flash drive. Security footage from the Grand Plaza Hotel, dated 3 weeks ago, shows Miss Whitmore meeting with a known document forger. I've included his signed confession. The judge reviewed the materials, her expression darkening. She looked up sharply at Sylvia. whose perfect composure had finally cracked. I also have phone records, Donovan continued, proving Miss Whitmore coordinated with James Kensington to fabricate evidence against Mrs. Carter. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Harold went pale, edging away from Sylvia as if her disgrace might be contagious. Your Honor, Sylvia's attorney jumped to his feet. Judge Wilkins held up her hand. We'll take a 30-minute recess while I review this evidence. Her gaze swept the courtroom, lingering on Sylvia's now ashen face. And then, I believe, we'll have much to discuss. Judge Wilkins turned the pages with methodical precision, her face revealing nothing as she examined the evidence. The courtroom remained utterly still, like a photograph frozen in time. At the defense table, Harold's hands trembled visibly. His once confident posture now collapsed into something small and frightened. Perspiration dotted his forehead as he darted glances between the judge and Sylvia. Beside her attorney, Evelyn closed her eyes and bowed her head. Her lips moved in silent prayer, not for victory or vindication, but for peace, whatever the outcome. The weight of the past months pressed heavy on her shoulders, yet something in her posture spoke of grace under pressure. The judge set down the final document and placed her reading glasses on the bench. The simple action broke the spell of silence. The court will now resume, she announced, her voice filling the room. As everyone settled, Judge Wilkins fixed her gaze on Sylvia. Miss Whitmore, these documents present compelling evidence that you deliberately fabricated evidence to discredit Mrs. Carter. Security footage shows you meeting with a known forger, and phone records connect you directly to this conspiracy. Sylvia's perfect makeup couldn't conceal the blotches of color rising in her cheeks. Your Honor, I can explain. Save it for your own trial. Judge Wilkins cut in. You may well be facing criminal charges for attempting to defraud this court. Harold seemed to shrink further into himself, eyes fixed on the floor. He couldn't bring himself to look at Evelyn. The judge turned to James Kensington. Mr. Kensington, your involvement in this scheme is equally troubling. Your uncle's wishes were clear, yet you chose to undermine them through deception. James Kensington, Walter's nephew, stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Judge Wilkins shuffled her papers, then addressed the entire courtroom. I've heard testimony after testimony attesting to Mrs. Carter's character. Decades of quiet generosity, compassion shown without expectation of reward. The very qualities that apparently led Walter Kensington to choose her as his heir. She leaned forward. In contrast, the petitioners have demonstrated precisely why Mr. Kensington might have excluded them from his will. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Evelyn opened her eyes, her hands still clasped tightly in her lap. The purpose of this court is to determine whether Walter Kensington was of sound mind when making his will, and whether undue influence was exerted. Judge Wilkins' voice grew firmer. Based on the evidence presented, including Mr. Kensington's own journals and the testimony of his staff, it is clear he made his decision deliberately and with full mental capacity. The judge paused, surveying the room. Furthermore, the alleged evidence of Mrs. Carter's manipulation has been proven not merely insufficient, but fraudulent. Evelyn's attorney squeezed her hand. David, from his seat in the back row, leaned forward in anticipation. Therefore, Judge Wilkins continued, it is the finding of this court that the last will and testament of Walter Kensington III shall be upheld in its entirety. Evelyn Carter is the rightful heir to the Kensington estate, effective immediately. All assets currently frozen will be released within 24 hours. The gavel slammed down with finality. This case is dismissed. For one heartbeat, the courtroom remained silent, then erupted in cheers and applause. People jumped to their feet, embracing one another. Mrs. Rodriguez burst into tears. The veterans in attendance stood at attention, offering Evelyn a solemn salute. Through the blur of happy tears, Evelyn saw David pushing through the crowd toward her, his face alight with joy. Harold slipped away unnoticed as Sylvia was confronted by her own attorney. The gavel struck again. Order, called Judge Wilkins, though her stern expression had softened as she watched Evelyn receive the community's embrace. Camera flashes exploded like lightning outside the courthouse. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Harold blinked against the harsh light, his face ashen and drawn. Sylvia clung to his arm, her designer sunglasses, unable to hide her fury. Mr. Carter, how does it feel to lose your ex-wife's fortune? Miss Whitmore, will you face charges for evidence tampering? Is it true you left your wife of 40 years for Miss Whitmore's money? The questions peppered them from all sides. Harold tugged at his collar, sweat visible through his expensive shirt. The confidence that had carried him away from Evelyn months ago had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell of a man. No comment, Harold muttered, eyes downcast. A bold reporter stepped directly in their path. Sources say you expected to benefit from Walter Kensington's will through Miss Whitmore's family connections. Was this a calculated move, Mr. Carter? Harold flinched. Beside him, Sylvia's painted smile cracked. This is ridiculous. Her voice cut through the chaos. Harold, tell them this is all misunderstanding. But Harold remained silent, shoulders hunched against the barrage. The reporter pressed on. Miss Whitmore, the judge suggested criminal charges may be forthcoming for forgery and attempted fraud. Care to comment? Sylvia's face hardened. She glanced at Harold, then at the crowd of reporters. The calculation in her eyes was visible even from across the street, where Evelyn stood quietly observing. I was misled, Sylvia announced, her voice carrying. Harold convinced me his ex-wife had manipulated Walter Kensington. I acted on information I believed was true. Harold's head snapped up. That's not. I'm as much a victim here as anyone, Sylvia continued, stepping away from him. My reputation has been damaged by association. You were the one who hired the forger, Harold hissed. The reporters surged forward, sensing blood in the water. Sylvia straightened her designer jacket, lips pressed into a thin line. I think we're done here, she said, not to the reporters, but to Harold. Sylvia, wait. But she was already walking away, phone pressed to her ear, likely calling her separate attorney. Harold stood abandoned on the courthouse steps, cameras capturing his humiliation for tomorrow's front page. Across the street, Evelyn watched the scene unfold. David stood beside her, his warm hand steady on her elbow. Karma works in mysterious ways, David murmured. Evelyn shook her head softly. I take no joy in this. And she meant it. The sight of Harold, the man who had shared her bed, her dreams, her life for 4 decades, standing alone and disgraced, stirred no triumph in her heart. Only a quiet sadness for what had been lost, and the knowledge that some prices were too high to pay. You ready to go? David asked. Harold glanced up then, his eyes meeting Evelyn's across the busy street. For a moment, time seemed suspended between them. 40 years of memories, love turned to betrayal, and now this final, public unraveling. His face crumpled with something like regret. Evelyn held his gaze, not with anger or satisfaction, but with the calm dignity that had carried her through the storm. She gave him a small, gentle nod, not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement. This chapter was closing. Yes, she told David, turning away from the courthouse steps. I'm ready. With her head held high and her shoulders squared, Evelyn walked away from the spectacle of her ex-husband's disgrace. The weight of resentment slipped from her shoulders with each step, leaving behind only the lightness of closure. The autumn wind scattered golden leaves across Evelyn's newly paved walkway as David stood on her porch. His weathered hands clutched a bouquet of wildflowers, not the perfect roses from florists, but meadow blooms he'd gathered himself, their imperfect beauty matching the moment. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. 3 days had passed since the courthouse. 3 days of him sitting alone in his modest home, the weight of his doubt crushing his chest. 3 days of rehearsing words that never seemed adequate. The door opened before his knuckles met wood. Evelyn stood there in a simple blue dress, her silver hair catching the afternoon light. I saw you from the window, she said. Her voice gentle, but guarded. David swallowed hard. The lines around his eyes deepened with shame. These are for you. He extended the flowers, his hands trembling slightly, though they are a poor offering compared to what I owe you. Evelyn accepted them, breathing in their fresh scent. Come in, she said after a moment. I just made tea. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the vindication had cleansed away old shadows. David followed her to the kitchen, where sunlight spilled across the warm but polished table. He remained standing as she arranged the wildflowers in a crystal vase, one of the few fine things she'd owned before Walter's inheritance. Evelyn, I failed you. The words broke from him like water through a cracked dam. When you needed someone to believe in you most, I hesitated. She turned to face him, her eyes clear and steady. You had your reasons, she said, but without bitterness. No, David shook his head firmly. I had my fears. After losing Martha, I couldn't bear the thought of being wrong about someone again, of trusting and losing. He sank into a chair, his voice dropping. But that's no excuse. I let my past cloud what I knew in my heart about you. Outside, a cardinal landed on the window sill, its red feathers bright against the glass. Do you know what I thought about during those dark hours? Evelyn asked, pouring tea into delicate cups. Not the money, not even Walter's will. I thought about the look in your eyes when you stepped back from me on those courthouse steps. David flinched. I'm so sorry. It hurt, she acknowledged, because you matter to me, more than I expected anyone would again. She sat across from him, her hands wrapped around her teacup. The steam rose between them like the ghosts of what might have been lost. I don't deserve a second chance, David said, his voice rough. But I'm asking for one anyway. I should have remembered that faith isn't faith if it breaks at the first sign of trouble. Evelyn studied him for a long moment. At 62, she learned that forgiveness wasn't about erasing hurt, but about choosing what to carry forward. The funny thing about second chances, she said finally, is that I've needed quite a few myself. Walter gave me one. The community gave me another. David looked up, hope cautiously dawning in his eyes. I'm not perfect either, David. Far from it. He reached across the table, his calloused palm up in offering. I promise I won't doubt you again. Not ever. Evelyn placed her hand over his, feeling the warmth of connection that had been missing in her life for so long. Their fingers intertwined, a silent bridge rebuilding what had nearly been lost. We all lose faith sometimes, she whispered. What matters is finding it again. David stood, still holding her hand, and moved around the table. Evelyn rose to meet him, and his arms encircled her tentatively at first, then with the certainty of coming home. She rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady rhythm of his heart, a new melody beginning in the autumn light. Spring sunshine poured through the tall windows of the newly constructed Kensington Foundation Community Center. Evelyn stood quietly in the entrance hall, watching children race through corridors that just months ago had been nothing but blueprints and dreams. The marble plaque beside her gleamed, the Walter Kensington III Foundation, where kindness leaves its trail. Her fingers brushed across the engraved letters, feeling the permanence of them beneath her touch. 6 months had transformed everything. The inheritance that once brought her pain now flowed outward, creating ripples of hope throughout the community. The center housed medical facilities for veterans, classrooms for adult education, playrooms for children, and gardens where the elderly taught youngsters to nurture growing things. Mrs. Carter, look what I made. A small boy with missing front teeth held up a colorful painting. Evelyn knelt despite her aging knees. It's beautiful, Tommy. Tell me about it. It's Mr. Walter in heaven, watching us. Tommy pointed to a smiling figure floating among clouds. My grandpa says he can see what we're doing. Evelyn's eyes misted. I believe that too. The grand hall filled steadily with townspeople, many faces she'd known her entire life. Some she'd only met through her charitable work. The suspicious whispers had long since transformed into grateful smiles. Mayor Jenkins approached, extending his hand. Evelyn, we're ready whenever you are. Quite the turnout. She nodded, smoothing the simple but elegant navy dress she wore. No designer labels or flashy jewelry wealth hadn't changed her taste for understated dignity. As she made her way to the podium, she caught glimpses of the community that had rallied around her in her darkest hour. The veterans from the home sat in a proud row, their medals catching the light. Families whose medical bills she'd paid nodded respectfully. Children from the newly funded school programs waved excitedly. Harold wasn't present. He left town months ago after Sylvia abandoned him. Evelyn had sent him enough money for a fresh start elsewhere, a final act of closure rather than spite. She took her place at the microphone, her hands steady on the speech she'd prepared. The crowd settled into expectant silence. When Walter Kensington chose me to carry forward his legacy, I asked myself, why me? Every day. Her voice carried clear and confident through the hall. I was just a woman who had served meals at the food pantry, who had sat with the lonely, who had done what any of us might do. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. But Walter understood something profound, that kindness isn't measured by grand gestures, but by the heart behind the smallest actions. He once wrote in his journal that wealth is worthless unless it builds bridges between people. From the corner of her eye, she noticed movement at the back of the hall. David entered slightly late, carrying something behind his back. He smiled apologetically as he made his way forward. This center isn't really about buildings or programs, Evelyn continued. It's about creating spaces where we see each other, truly see each other beyond status or circumstance. David reached the front row, revealing a bouquet of wildflowers, the same humble blooms he brought to her porch that autumn day when he asked forgiveness. Walter's legacy isn't his money. It's the reminder that kindness leaves a trail that outlasts us all. The audience rose in applause. Evelyn stepped away from the podium, accepting David's flowers with a radiant smile as the community, her community, celebrated not just the building, but the heart that had built it. The evening air carried the sweet scent of flowering dogwoods as Evelyn and David strolled hand in hand through Kensington Memorial Park. Golden hour sunlight filtered through fresh spring leaves, casting a warm glow over the restored pathways where families gathered. David's weathered hand felt solid in hers, his steps matching her slower pace without hurry. A gentle breeze lifted the edges of her light cardigan as children zoomed past on bicycles and scooters along paths that had been cracked and abandoned just a year before. "Remember what this place looked like last summer?" Evelyn asked, pausing by a new bench overlooking the pond. David nodded. Overgrown. Forgotten. His eyes crinkled at the corners, like some of us felt. A young mother pushed a stroller past them, waving with her free hand. "Evening, Mrs. Carter, Mr. Reynolds. Beautiful night, isn't it?" Evelyn called back, watching the woman join a group of other parents by the playground, a vibrant, modern structure that had replaced rusted swings and splintered slides. They settled on the bench, shoulders touching. The setting sun painted the water in shimmering oranges and pinks. From the playground came peals of laughter, the soundtrack of renewal. "The foundation board approved the expansion for the Veterans Housing Program," David said, his voice holding the quiet pride that emerged whenever he spoke of the project closest to his heart. Evelyn squeezed his hand. "Walter would have loved that. He would have loved seeing you like this even more." She turned to him, questioning. "At peace," David clarified, "in your element." A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind that comes only with genuine companionship. Nearby, a grandfather taught his grandson to sail a model boat across the pond's surface. "I used to think losing Harold was the end of everything," Evelyn said softly. "All those years wasted. My future empty." David's thumb traced gentle patterns on her palm. "Now I look back and see it was just the beginning." She watched a young couple push their toddler on a swing, the child's face alight with joy. "Not because of the money, but because losing everything showed me what truly matters." The last rays of sunlight caught the simple silver band David had placed on her finger 2 months ago. Not an engagement ring that were beyond such conventions at their age, but a promise nonetheless, different from her first marriage. Wiser, kinder. As dusk settled over the park, families began gathering their belongings. Parents called children from play structures. Picnic blankets were folded. The day wound gently to its close. "We should head back," David suggested as streetlights flickered on along the pathways. Evelyn nodded but lingered a moment longer. In the gathering twilight, the park transformed. The silhouettes of trees Walter had loved, the sound of the community he'd valued, the feeling of purpose he'd entrusted to her, it all merged into something profound. "You know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "people think Walter left me a fortune, but his true gift wasn't the money." David helped her to her feet, his eyes patient and understanding. "It was showing me that even when everything seems lost, there's always a path back to love, to dignity, to faith." She looked around at the park one last time before turning toward home. This is the true inheritance. As they walked away, the sound of children's laughter faded into the gentle symphony of evening crickets, beginning their night songs, leaves rustling in the breeze, and the steady rhythm of two hearts that had found unexpected joy in life's twilight chapter. If you enjoyed the story of Evelyn Carter, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.